Greetings, true believers, and welcome back in. I am Ed Berliner, the man in the arena. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to the free-for-all. We have a lot to catch up on because the Super Bowl has been here, Major League Baseball is not going to play, and there's everything else that we can do to go ahead and see if we can make people angry at us, which is why we're in this business in the first place, because, yeah, we want to tell good stories, but let's face it, here in 2022, the anger factor is all part of what we do. Let us first welcome from the western part of the state where Tom Brady is not coming back. I just thought I'd mention that in case anybody is wondering, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to have a very difficult time finding a quarterback these days. No, Aaron Rodgers is not available. Let's welcome in, formerly of the Tampa Tribune, Joey Johnston joins us. So let's just get that real briefly off the top here. Tom's not coming back, and as far as we know at this point, it is not going to be the Aaron Rodgers next act. Please say that's true.
I believe it is. Now the bigger question is, are the Bucs back to being the Bucs? We had this little magical 2-year run of Tom Brady. Now we've got some potential problems here with this franchise moving forward. We'll see how they go about solving them. They certainly need a quarterback of some repute, and they have none at this point. So it sure seems like the Bucs are back to being the Bucs, but time will tell.
I think we just scared the crap out of people saying the Bucs are going to be back to being the Bucs again. That would be dangerous indeed. Let's move up to the center part of the state, formerly of the Orlando Sentinel, where, as I have said to people many times, you can tell what kind of a person lives in Central Florida, whether they are a Disney person, a Universal person, or a SeaWorld person, which is all part of figuring out who the individual is. Formerly of the Orlando Sentinel, George Diaz, who will now reveal to the entire world that he has never been to Universal Studios.
Well, I take that back. I was there once, and I believe it was part of one of those media scrums back when Florida Sister Sports used to host the Big Ten and the SEC. So in any case, maybe once at Universal, a bunch of times at SeaWorld and Disney, of course. But I'm more of a Disney World guy now. My girlfriend has a season pass, so in the spirit of peace, love, and happiness, I have been going a little bit here and there. Certainly not as engaged, but you know the drill.
And for those who live in Florida or do not, you don't understand how well we are into the seasonal passes here, which the prices are going up on anyway, just like it is everything else. So speaking of entertainment then, northern Florida and the city of Jacksonville. Huzzah, huzzah. Hey, look, I don't think there's been anything controversial about the Jaguars in the last 2 weeks. Okay, well, maybe I overstated a little bit because our guest is going to figure it out, of course, if you will, from Jacksonville, Sam Kouvaris, who comes to us having been at the Super Bowl and been part of the partying. Wow, look at you. I mean, come on, everybody knows that if you're part of the press, Sam, when you go to Super Bowls, we used to, years ago, love to go to the parties. But now it's kind of like, there's just too many
Yeah,
governments.
the parties have become very corporate, very, all the different things, the Mike Ditka smoke and all that other stuff. That used to be a lot of fun. And as a reporter, it was great because, as we've talked about many times here on this show, I mean, it was a chance to build relationships with guys. They could see you and you could see them in a very different situation in a different light, but very corporate, very different. I'll tell you one quick story. I got invited in New Orleans, Northwest Airlines. This is how long ago, right? When did Delta take them over? 20 years ago. They took over the entire Hard Rock Cafe there, and my brother and I went to the party. It was phenomenal. I mean, Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad was there. The Blues Brothers performed. Every NFL player. It was right when Michael Irvin said, "Hey, I'm going to tone my act down." He showed up in an electric blue suit with spats and a white bowler and a white cane. I thought that was funny. Every Victoria's Secret model was there. It was really a spectacular party. And I got to the velvet rope. My brother and I, our name was on the list, and I stepped through the velvet rope, and Greg Lloyd was standing behind me in line, and he wasn't on the list. And as I walked down the hall, he yells, "Hey, Sam." And I turn around, and he was always an asshole to me, always. And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "How about it?" And I said, "Well, isn't that funny? I'm inside and you're outside." And I turned around and walked away. And my brother said, "Have you lost your mind? I mean, is he coming after us?" I don't know if he got in or not, but he didn't get in on my nickel. I can tell you that.
Okay, well, Ben, and we could even go back to the Steinberg parties, but that's another issue. Lee Steinberg's
Yeah,
party was always the greatest one, but now, of course, it's Lee still has the party too, and I got invited. I've been invited every year. I'm on the list for Steinberg's party. He's
right.
a great guy, and I haven't made the Super Bowl in a lot of years. But you're right. It's you used to be able to have some fun with the players, but not anymore because
Not anymore.
everybody
They're
knows
not
that.
interested.
Everybody knows that
Right.
the fun is gone. All right, at least it's Super Bowls. Well, I tell you what, Sam. Let's go ahead and start there then, because let's talk about. I mean, you were there in Los Angeles. You were there for the Super Bowl. You went there and you had a chance to, rub elbows with a lot of the guys again. But you were there for a very specific reason because you were part of the Hall of Fame committee. And Tony Baselli, the great player from the Jaguars, gets into the Hall of Fame. And I think it comes down again to this whole issue of what is a Hall of Fame? I mean, from the player's perspective, what makes a player a Hall of Fame player to where it's a knockdown, drag out, you can't miss? And then there's other guys and gals in other Halls of Fame that take years to get in. We have to wait and wait. And it's always been in my conversation that if you're worthy of the Hall of Fame, you get in the first time and that's it. If you don't get in the second time, your stats don't get any better. But it seems as if that's just not the case anymore. Have the Halls of Fame been cheapened to the point where they're the halls of sometimes really good?
Some people think that. I happen to disagree, and the reason I disagree is because I'm very familiar with the process. And the Baseball Hall of Fame is a little different. And of course, Joey can speak to this. That you vote for 10 guys, and I guess, and then if you get 75% of the ballot, you get in. I mean, I think that's how it is. The Pro Football Hall of Fame is very different in that we're only allowed to put 5 players in every year, and you're not eligible until your career is over for 5 years. And then you're eligible for 20 years after that. And then you go into the morass that's known as the senior pool. But so for a player like Tony Baselli and Leroy Butler, by the way, who's from Jacksonville, both of them were in their 16th year of eligibility. Baselli didn't gain any traction until 6 years ago when we put Terrell Davis and Kenny Easley in the Hall. Davis, who played 78 games, and Easley, who played 89 games. That there was some thought on there that perhaps more players with short careers should be considered. Baselli, who played 97 games, was put out of the league because of a doctor's mistake on what they call a standard cleanup on his shoulder, and it couldn't be repaired. So, I mean, his career was definitely shorter. But statistically, when you go into it, and I won't bore you with everything, but there's 305 players now in the Hall of Fame. 23% of them are there are 30 tackles. 23% of every tackle played fewer games. 19% of all players in the Hall played either fewer games or less than one full season more than Baselli. And Jimbo Covert is a good example because Covert, all-decade player, made a couple of Pro Bowl, made a couple of All-Pro teams, made a few Pro Bowls, only played 111 games, and he was put in the Centennial Committee. So I think there was some thought about that. And perhaps going forward, and we've talked about this a little bit here, shorter careers are going to be more the norm. I mean, a guy like Luke Kuechly, who just retired. I mean, Patrick Willis is on the ballot. He played 8 years and retired. There's enough money in the game where players can do that now if they sign a second and certainly a third contract. But the 200-game player, I think, is probably going to be very rare going forward. And at the same time, in the last 5 years in the Hall, we've put in half of the 20 players that we could have put in were first-year eligibles. Now, I mean, to me, first-year eligible is a guy like you stand up and you go Peyton Manning, and then you sit down, and guys vote yes.
Sure.
Charles Woodson, Hall of Famer? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
Calvin
agreed.
Johnson? Yeah. Do they have to be first ballot guys? No, but the committee has gotten younger and larger since I got on it 28 years ago. Was 31 representatives from each team, and then the Pro Football Writers Association of America president. And now it's 49, much more diverse, much younger. And I realized in doing some canvassing and some research about the committee, half of the committee had never seen Baselli or Butler play. So it's gotten younger. I'm sorry, much more reliant on statistics and highlights instead of the eye test, which used to be
Okay,
really just
but I want to
big.
go back to something that you said. You use the phrase gain traction when it comes down to putting a player in the Hall of Fame and Baselli being in his 16th year. How do you gain traction? I mean, look, your career is over. There's your numbers. Here's what you did. In my mind, you are either eligible for the Hall of Fame at that moment or you're not, because
Right.
all of a sudden the stats get better, the tackles get harder, the numbers get better in relation to other players. See, I got a problem with that, Sam. And it's not like I'm trying to keep anybody out of the Hall
Yeah,
of
but
Fame,
Ed,
but I'm
what if
saying let's
what
make
if
them the Hall of Fame one shot. Why, how do they get better?
because what? No, they don't, and you're right. But what happens is the Hall changes the rules. All right, about how to get in. And the committee kind of changed the rules on how to get in. Nobody was considering Easley or Davis or Baselli because their careers were too short. All of a sudden, the whole committee changed the rules to include players with shorter careers. So that's how they got in. Joey can talk to this. What if Major League Baseball came and said, you can't consider the fact that Bonds and Clemens and Palmeiro and Anderson and all these guys use steroids? That's not part of the equation any longer. You're only allowed to vote on the stats. And they're in contact with us, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, very specifically about what the rules are. Lawrence Taylor almost didn't get into the Hall in his first year of eligibility. He might be the greatest defensive player to ever play the game. That, you could sit there and talk about that.
No, but that's
it
fair. That's fair.
right. But the Hall changed the rules because they were very specific after that, because some guys, including me, didn't vote for him because in the bylaws it said contributions to the game. Well, I thought his contributions to the game at the time, I mean, he was with underage girls, asleep at the light, he was a drug addict, blah, 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 blah.
Sorry.
I thought his contributions to the game were negative at the time. Well, after that, they said, okay, that only applies to contributors, and you can only consider, and this was, again, they refined it in talking about Terrell Owens, you can only consider what happens between the lines, okay? And between the lines, then they refined it even further when they talked about Charles Haley. It includes what happens in the locker room. And so my argument has always been, look, if we're going to sit around and pontificate that football is the ultimate team sport, isn't what kind of teammate you were part of the equation?
Yeah, but how do you judge that, though? You and I, the four of us, sit here and talking about what kind of teammate they were. We're not in the locker rooms at times when the guys are pissing and moaning and screaming and throwing stuff at each other across the locker room. So how do we really know? And again, let me bring Joey in on this as somebody who's involved with the Baseball Hall of Fame. How do we really know what somebody is doing in the locker room, that character that they have? We're all guessing and hearing second-hand stories from everybody around the locker room. Okay, wait a minute.
Let me just say,
Sam, go ahead.
Let me just say one other thing. On the Hall of Fame committee, there are 4 Hall of Famers on the committee. Dan Fouts and James Lofton are on the committee. They're teammates with these guys, and they obviously have talked to their other teammates. So you're right. As reporters, we don't know the specifics of it. But you get close enough to players, and when you have guys who are voting members of the selection committee who are in the hall, Bill Polian, who, in the locker room, they can speak to what kind of teammate they were.
Yeah, but they're not in the locker room at that time. They're removed from the locker room 10, 15 years.
These guys, I mean, I don't know. I just think Lofton and Fouts were, and it wasn't by coincidence that the week of the voting that Charles Haley revealed that he had been diagnosed as bipolar. All right, it wasn't a coincidence that's when they put it out there. And does he deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? Absolutely, if you're considering that. And if he really had mental health issues, then yeah, I mean that's something that should be revealed. Terrell Owens basically was thrown off of 5 teams. Was he an unbelievable player? Yeah. So, but
he was an asshole in the locker room and to all of his teammates. So that's all part of it,
right?
Joey, go ahead. Come on in on this. And Sam brings up an excellent point here. You know where I stand on this, where it's one and out. You can't keep. But Sam makes a great point. If you're going to change the rules every year, then you have to go back and look at somebody every single year over and over again, and maybe their stats do get better.
Yeah, several points here. I'll just jump in here. I think, as sports journalists, we I think we always are guilty sometimes of creating a mythology around a player and or an athlete, and I've always thought none of us can really know what a person is. We think we do, but we really don't. In terms of determining whether somebody's a good teammate or a good person, or who is this person when you're voting for them, all you can do is, I guess, be a reporter and talk to a lot of people and build a story around that, build some facts and some evidence around that, and get as much other opinions as possible. And I think for the most part, if you do that, you're going to get closer to the truth than you would if you just believed what you think you see from afar. So there's that. On the other thing about gaining traction and the stats don't change, this is true, but sometimes the procedural element of each of these halls of fame don't allow you to just say yes or no to a given player. So you have to establish a pecking order. You have to prioritize. And some guys that obviously are halls of famers are not, you can't put them on your ballot because there are limits. Limits of the ballot or time limits or such that you can't do it. So I think that's it's not really gaming the system or anything, but there's sort of a way you've got to go about it, an order you've got to follow just because of the procedure of the rules.
So then it's okay. I'm willing to say that I guess I'm wrong in this one then, but I understand it now. If you're going to continue to change the rules, then players do get better without playing a single inning or another single down.
Yeah, like Ed said, or like Sam said, I guess there were some changes in the football. I mean, baseball's had some small changes, such as going from 15 years to 10 years, which makes it a little more urgency. If it was 15 years, the Bonds and Clemens thing would probably play out and they would get in the next 5 years. But it seems to me like, based on what Sam said, that they did change the way of doing it midstream. You've got different people coming on the committee, so that sounds like a situation in flux. So maybe there was a little bit more of a forgiving look at a guy like Tony Boselli. That sounds like what happened, and I'm glad to see it. He kind of reminds me in a way of Leroy Selman here in Tampa, guy that played 9 years here, was a cornerstone when the franchise started, and people thought he didn't play long enough, but certainly was a great player. And I think I see a lot of similarity between Selman and Boselli.
George, come on in here.
Wait,
go ahead, Sam.
Tell you one thing real quick, Ed. There's 2,000 players eligible each year. The ballot contains about 110 guys. And then we virtually cut it down to 25 and then to 15. And then we talk about them during the meeting in that one day. When I from 15 to 10, I know I'm eliminating some guys who certainly deserve to be discussed. When I have to cut that ballot from 10 to 5 during the meeting, those 5 guys I'm eliminating, I know that these are Hall of Fame worthy guys. And as Joey said, you've got to determine which guys you're putting in. Sometimes it has to do with how long they've been on the ballot. Sometimes it has to do with how many offensive linemen or how many safeties or how many quarterbacks are on the roster. I think Aikman and Young got in the same class. Might have been those two. Couple safeties occasionally get in. I think Ty Law and John Lynch got in at the same time. But you're probably not going to put 2 offensive linemen in the same year. And so you're eliminating guys. And when you get to that last 5, these guys are Hall of Famers, and you're just not going to vote for them this year. You can only put in 5.
George, I tell you what, I mean, between the arguments, and these are guys who are involved in it, from both Sam and Joey, I'm starting to fall in line here. I mean, holy God, Berliner's wrong.
Uh-oh.
Drop that one up. We're in huge trouble there.
Wait a minute. Let's stop the presses, as we like to say. Here's the deal. I think we're all talking, and I think we can agree on this. It's always going to be subjective. There's always going to be holes most of the time. There's some obviously guys out there like the Jerry Rices of the world that are in, and no question. But there's always, for a good portion or a substantial part of these nominees, when it gets down to are they in or are they not? There are going to be some issues that can be raised. So I think that we have to just kind of go with the process and trust the people who are entrusted with making these decisions, like Sam and Joey, and really hope for the best. And there's always going to be this is your quintessential sports bar argument discussion on steroids, right? Because we're talking about the Hall of Fame, and it's who is the worthy of the most who's the most worthy of all of these guys out there. And so there's always going to be some little crossfire involving somebody,
Well,
right?
wait a minute, but
So,
it's interesting how you just said it's an argument on steroids. So let's go there for a second.
I didn't even mean that. I didn't even mean that as a play on words, but it works.
You didn't mean it, but you dropped it in here because if we're going to go ahead and okay, let's agree that because they changed the rules and things happen, that if you don't get in, the voters can then make decisions and you can get in after 15, 16, 17 years. But what about the off-field, outside the off the ice, off the court issues where we're back into this issue again about steroids and drugs and rape allegations and assault allegations and cheating and wife cheating and multiple children that aren't being supported by a player? What happens there? Because you know that the voters, George, whoever they are, we all know what's going on, so it clouds our vision. But do we have to then come out with a straight rule in the Hall of Fame and say, period, end of story, whatever he or she did off the surface means nada? And if you hold that against them, then you don't deserve to be a voter. Where do we draw that line?
It's a tough line to draw, but I think that for the sake of where we are in today's society and all of the character issues, not everyone has character issues, but we certainly see a lot of it. I think that would not be a bad idea, that to draw some sort of black and white scenario in which it doesn't give the voters much wiggle room other than dealing with performance, because that would simplify the matter.
Is
And
that possible, though?
as things, what?
I mean, I'll throw
I
this
don't know
out.
if it's possible. I don't know if it's possible.
I don't
So
think
that's
it
the thing. I
is.
think that we are where we are and things are not going to change. So I think that we're going to be dealing with this every time you get into the Baseball Hall of Fame, into the NFL Hall of Fame. You're going to be dealing with these particular issues because we are where we are as a society, and we're not in the days where Babe Ruth was hanging out in trains with the writers eating hot dogs and everybody was chummy and looked the other way. All our skeletons are out there to be exposed now.
See,
So
that's it. That's it. There's the skeletons. Joey and Sam, jump in, whichever one here. The skeletons are there. What I think I'm talking about is a Pollyannish world where we could say, well, you have to leave it off the field. It doesn't happen because we're human, and whatever somebody does off the playing surface, it's going to get figured in. But do you then have to? Boy, we're opening up all kinds of cans of worms here. For instance, if you are noted to have taken steroids, I've said over and over again that I think that there should be a plaque. Pete Rose, prime example. Pete Rose, put him in the Hall of Fame, put on his plaque. He broke the rule of baseball. He lied, but put it right there so that everybody knows. And if somebody is found to have been taking steroids during any sport whatsoever, whether it's Alex Rodriguez, Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, anybody, it's got to go on the plaque if you're going to put it there. I think we're dealing in impossibles.
Yeah, probably true. But when you look at, I mean, could John Kennedy have operated as president the way he did in the modern day? Of course not. I mean, just the rules were different back then. So you have to decide. There's two things I want to say real quick. You have to decide whether or not the Hall of Fame were you the best player of your era, let's say a 10-year athletic career in professional sports. Were you the best player there? Or how do you stack up in the history of the game? Can you say that Alex Rodriguez was as good a hitter as Ty Cobb, or was he just the top 5 hitter of his era? So you have to kind of decide that. And remember, the Halls of Fame, and I'm not naive enough to think that the Halls of Fame operate completely autonomously. But while baseball and football and certainly basketball have influenced the organizations themselves over the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Fames are autonomous operations. I mean, the Pro Football Hall of Fame is not run by the NFL. Rob Manfred has figured out that by making Pete Rose ineligible, then he can keep him out of the Hall of Fame. I mean, obviously, previous commissioners did the same. But the Pro Football Hall of Fame doesn't have any such rules because they have everybody is eligible. They've never made anybody ineligible, and the commissioner's never done that either. So remember, it's their Hall of Fame. They can run it the way that they want. And if you want to be a voter in that situation, you need to abide by their rules.
Joey?
Yeah, the halls of fame, all of them are essentially museums and tributes to the history of the game. That's the biggest thing to me. And the other thing is, okay, you have a legal system, you have substance rules, all of this. But if a player is allowed to play under the legal system and under the rules of the substance abuse or whatnot, if he's allowed to play, then he's put on the ballot. Then I think he's eligible for the Hall of Fame. If he's broken some rule or something like that, then he shouldn't be on the ballot. To me, it seems crazy if he's allowed to play and he puts up all these numbers and then he's placed on a Hall of Fame ballot, and then journalists and former players and all are suddenly made to be the judge and jury of this guy when he's been allowed to play all these years. I think there's a breakdown in that system. If he's having a transgression or doing something wrong, maybe he shouldn't be playing.
Well, but does that not have to be there flat out? And maybe it already is, where you can tell the voters, you must only take what goes on between those lines. Forget what you hear in the locker room. Forget about somebody throwing a helmet. Forget about somebody who's involved in a drug bust. Forget about somebody who doesn't pay for their children when it comes down to their welfare. Forget all of that. If you can't do that, then you can't be a voter in the Hall of Fame, period. Yes?
Yeah, I think
Pollyanna again.
People are going to view it differently. I think some people are very hard and fast on this area. Others are a little more lenient. And I think as time goes on, as committees become younger and more diverse, it seems to change as well. So I think there's always going to be a little bit of a sliding scale here in how this is viewed.
Well, isn't that going to be it? I mean, you brought something up, George. Isn't it fair to say, and Joey, when he said younger, and we've all talked about this, as these Hall of Fame committees get younger, you're going to have more of an attitude of, well, okay, it happened, it wasn't that bad, his family's fine. I mean, don't you think that as it gets younger, they're going to allow more because they're going to, or maybe they're going to be a lot stricter now the way things happen in the cancel culture?
Good question, but I think it's going to skew to more lenience because we're talking different cultures, to use a cliche.
Different societal mores, different morality.
The get off my lawn guys are not going to be around. And so I would tend to think that there would be more of an inclusive nature in which people look at the overall picture, look at society and what we deal with. And of course, that doesn't mean that if you went out and killed somebody that you're good to go. But I think that there will be tendencies to be more lenient in the process as we move forward.
Yeah, and I believe that that's going to come down as far as the youth is concerned. I think they will get to that point. Let's go ahead and move on. George, let's go ahead and stay with the NFL here, because here we've got, holy God, where do we start? I mean, looks like a cover-up lawsuit going on in Dallas with the Cowboys. Jerry Jones and a former member of their media staff, Danny Snyder, is sitting in front of Congress right now testifying, and there's problems in the Commanders' front office. Notice how I said Commanders? I got that in there. It was really good. I remembered. I was almost going to say Redskins. And then in Miami, you've got Stephen Ross, who may have lied, broken laws, may have been trying to fix the games, and people saying that he's going to lose the franchise, or he should lose the franchise if he's found to have tried to alter the game or fix the games. Hey, George, we're all over the place right now. But isn't the end of this that the NFL doesn't care? It's okay. We're not going to get rid of Snyder. He's too powerful. We're not going to get rid of Jones. He's too powerful. Stephen Ross, let him go. Let him go play with a Grand Prix track if he wants to. We don't care. And if we lose 2% of our audience, we'll get it back. Have you seen the Super Bowl in the ratings? We made another fortune. Isn't that all fair to say? They don't care.
No, there's no reason to care. If the house was on fire and people were turning away, and we remember how a former president, who shall remain nameless, thought he was going to take down the NFL over the taking a knee issue. How's that working out? No, the NFL is boss man in town and in the sports universe, and they can do whatever the hell they want. And the public perception and the media perception be damned, because there's not enough pushback for them to do any operate business any differently. We did see Goodell out there put that memo that got leaked out that say we gotta have to take the Rooney Rule seriously. And there's
Come on.
lo and behold, look who gets hired all after all the initial stain comes out. You've got all these other coaches that get hired who are minority candidates. But here's the deal: regardless of whether that happened or not, the NFL is Teflon. The NFL is Teflon. There is no. I don't think that there is any. I don't see any controversy to you, Ed, that can take them down. None.
No, the only thing I can see is, let's say that Stephen Ross is found to have violated some sort of law, federal law, state law, whatever. Let's say that they prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that he said to Brian Flores, if you tank, you're going to help this franchise, which is game fixing, no matter how you put it. And if it's proven, and if the league allows Stephen Ross to hold his franchise, that will be unprecedented at that point. The furor will be incredible. People will scream. You, I, and everybody else on this panel will be doing this all the time. Get rid of him. But the common fan, who we really should pay less attention to on social media every single day, they don't care. I mean, but will that do anything if they let this guy keep his franchise?
No, they wouldn't let him keep his franchise. They'd make him the fall guy. That's what they would do.
Because he's easy, because he's not that powerful.
They need that scapegoat and say, hey, we took care of it, we're moving on. That's what they would do. That's exactly, I bet you dollars to donuts, that's exactly what they will do if Ross is found guilty of doing the things that he did. They'll get rid of him, and then they'll say, see, we took care of the problem. Let's move forward. And hey, kickoff is at 1:00. Get on FanDuel and DraftKings and ESPN and do your thing.
Well, there it is, too. You brought in DraftKings and all the other gambling. I mean, come on. We all come from an era when we were recovering the NFL in any sport. Gambling? You got to keep that out, guys. Come on. That's the one thing you don't talk about. Now they're all in bed and everybody's making millions of dollars in it. So they just don't care. It's all about profit. Sam, it comes again, I think, to what George said, and I think it's the perfect analogy. The NFL is Teflon. I don't see anything, save for if an owner stood in the middle of Times Square or One Buccaneer Place or the downtown Jacksonville Landing or Bayfront and shot somebody in public, they'd probably get away with it because they are Teflon, and the NFL will cover it up and people will still pay money. It's the American sport.
I don't think that's true. I do think that
Really?
the only thing that fans want to be guaranteed is that there is some integrity in the competition of the game.
Really?
And
You
if
think fans care about integrity?
I do, about the competition of the game, yes. And part of it is because most of them are betting on the game. Like you said, these days, gambling has become a part of it. The NFL has gambling partners. I always used to think it was funny that, everybody, it was always taboo, but in the paper, you could always read the lines. The latest line was on the Agate page every day about
what page?
where
what
the
page?
line
The Agate page. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I
Long
mean,
gone.
but it's kind of funny that I do think fans care about the integrity of the competition. And if Ross is found to have tried to tamper with that, that's a problem. The fact that Daniel Snyder is just a jerk probably doesn't, mean he has to get rid of his franchise. But at some point, what I learned in the whole process when the Jaguars, when Touchdown Jacksonville at the time was trying to get the Jaguars as a franchise, is that NFL group of owners is basically a fraternity. And at the time, it was 28 white guys, and there were 28 white general managers. And when they would have that, private meeting, there were 56 guys sitting there. I'll never forget. I mean, I got dragged into the meeting one time with the mayor of Jacksonville, and I look over it, and Hugh Culverhouse, who I knew, is sitting back in his chair with his feet up on the table. I mean, it was just like looking at a fraternity meeting. A couple of owners are sitting in the back in this ballroom smoking cigars in the ballroom. So, I mean, it was just like a fraternity meeting, and that's what it is. I'm convinced that Jacksonville got a franchise because they all kind of liked Wayne Weaver. You know, he was a pledge, and they were like,
Sure.
I like that guy. Let's let him in. So certainly there was, some long-term benefit they thought from a business standpoint. But, Weaver ran 9 West. He was a good marketing guy and really had showed some business acumen that some of those owners didn't have at the time. Nonetheless, I think until it comes down to the integrity of the game, fans don't care. But when that is in question, I do think that's where they draw the line.
Okay, then let's draw a line from that. And I think it's interesting. We talk about gambling and integrity. And Sam, you brought this up because more people are gambling now legally on professional sports, the NFL, than ever before. Multi-millions of dollars are being made by states in tax revenue. The NFL's cashing in. All these companies are cashing in. And the fans want to be sure that the information they're getting is real and that the games aren't being fixed, as is being indicated by Stephen Ross. So, Joey, what it seems like we've got here is gambling may have raised the integrity bar. I don't believe I'm saying this out loud, but think about this. Gambling may have raised the integrity bar on sports to a level never before seen. Because with the financial investment of the fan these days, and all of these sponsors and the teams having to now rely on them gambling and making spitloads of money, if they screw that up and the gamblers walk away, that's a huge hole. Gamblers have now decided and made the games better for everybody. What is the world that we've walked into here? This is frightening.
That's a heck of a storyline. I hadn't really thought of it that way.
Think about that.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting the way you put that, and maybe there's some truth there. But getting back to what Sam said, I certainly agree with that. I think the authenticity and the reliability of the games is the paramount line that can never be crossed. If you look at, we talk about the Baseball Hall of Fame and substances and other things. But the one thing that keeps people out or the taboo, Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson, guys who were alleged to have gambled or fixed the game in some way. That's the line that can never be crossed. And I think that is certainly the line that can never be crossed in football, basketball, any sport. Years ago, and I can't remember the circumstance, but I found myself interviewing Jerry Jones here in Tampa about a number of subjects, and I remember one of the things he said was, "You know why our sport is so popular? You know why the NFL is the way it is?" And I go, "Why?" Because we're not like wrestling. We're not like wrestling. And okay, yeah, fair point. His point was we're authentic. What you see is what you get. This isn't a fake thing. This is genuine competition. And if that is ever compromised, then that opens up a box that you don't want to go down. But your point on gambling leading the way, that's a heck of an interesting point.
But think about that now, because if you've got, and I don't even have the figures in front of me, but if you've got every Sunday, let's just take the NFL. If you've got $100 million being gambled every Sunday, and I could be real off on that, I could be very low. And the gamblers all want the accurate information. They get it from their touts. They get it from the sources. They get it from reporters. They get it from social media. And if for one instance that a gambler or Caesar's Palace decides that there's an inequity or something going on in the sport or in the game that's a game fix, they pull that sucker off the board. I mean, they're not taking bets on it. The gamblers then go crazy. Wait a minute, we've got to make our money. This is part of our parlay that we got to hit this week. We can't do it. We can't verify it. The gamblers would scream. The sponsors would now scream, like DraftKings and all the rest. And the NFL is going to lose money. And you and I, all 4 of us know here that if they lose $1, they're going to be upset about it. So gamblers are now the ones who are going to force them. Holy crap. To be honest, I'm guys, this is blowing my mind just thinking about this right now. But I mean, does it not lead us to the point where the NFL now has more reason to make sure that they are on the level than ever before, because it goes all back to the money?
I think the way you explained that, I can buy that point, actually. Had never thought about it in that way before, but I think I agree with you.
George, am I far off?
No, I'm still trying to process that wrestling is fake, and you've crushed my dreams. But I'll try to
Sorry,
it on sometime. Thank you, Joey.
Yeah.
Anyway, I agree. I mean, I do think that there's always the splitting hairs. I mean, I think that I forget what the rules are, and Sam would know this a lot better. Listing guys as doubtful or as questionable, they still try to game the system, and in terms of coaches, Bill Belichick being front and center. Where if you're out there gambling, you just don't know if this guy's going to play. A lot of time, it's a game time decision, and you've got all these other variables now because there's a lot of money potentially in line, whether a Tom Brady, a Jonathan Taylor, or somebody like that plays or not. So the gambling element, it used to be kind of that seedy thing over there in the corner, and now it's out in the open and embraced by everyone, and it certainly raises a little bit of eyebrows. And I think that they are doing what they can to make it as transparent as possible.
Well, look, I have a great friend of mine who is a professional gambler, and he says, I don't bet on the National Hockey League, period. Why? And here's to your point, George. When they come out with their injuries, it's a lower body injury, it's an upper body injury. They are not specific in the least. He says, as a gambler, I need to know, because if it's an ankle, that's going to keep him out for a period of time. If it's a concussion, that's another period of time. If I can't honestly value what the players in the games are doing with regard to injuries, I'm not going to gamble on them. And Sam, here we go. In the NFL, Major League Baseball, other places, he's got a broken arm, he's got a sprained ankle, he's got an issue with his knee. That's the point that gamblers want. Can you imagine, Sam, if the NFL and all the teams just started calling it an upper body and a lower body injury? Gamblers would scream. And again, that affects the bottom line.
They would. Did you know that there was $3 billion bet legally on golf last year? All right.
$3 billion with a B.
$3 billion, and that was legal, the legal gambling, and the kind of bets, and the attractive thing about that for gamblers is how you can do it live. The odds change during the round. They change day to day. You can bet head to head. You can bet scores. You can bet all kinds of different stuff. And so that's probably the fastest growing thing. But where have they had problems with quote unquote fixing? And gamblers they're very shrewd, and the people who run the gambling things are very shrewd. Where have they had problems with that? In tennis and in the lower echelons of tennis. The only time you have ever heard of any prosecution or them figuring out, oh, there was an undue amount of money bet on this second-tier player who was also playing another second-tier player, something that wasn't going to affect the majors, wasn't going to affect anybody's reputation, and all of a sudden they realize, oh, yeah, this guy was fixing the match. So there always is going to be problems with the integrity of the competition that people are going to call into question. But the big sports that most of the money is bet on, they're going to have to guarantee that. I think you're right, Ed. I think gambling may have guaranteed the integrity of the game overall, because you can't keep everybody quiet if the injury is significant enough to, as you said, a guy like Tom Brady.
Gambling may have guaranteed the integrity of the game. Gentlemen, we have now officially entered the twilight zone. I mean, yeah, really, right. It's a head exploding thing, but again, it all comes down to the buck. And if the NFL is going to protect their buck and their sponsors, then they've got to make sure that their integrity is tops. And it still leads us to wonder what's going to happen now with all the lawsuits and Stephen Ross. But gamblers, you're in control. We have finally acquiesced this point to you. What a world we're in. Okay, baseball now. Let's go ahead and finish out, because as we sit here today and we're talking, the two sides have met in baseball for, I think, 37 seconds across the bargaining tables at this point, where they just look at each other and they spit once or twice and they walk away, and that's it. It doesn't look as if anything is happening here. Joey, I got to be honest. I know you're tied in with baseball and the various committees and the Hall of Fame, and I don't hear, read, or see a huge groundswell in the country right now of fans that are really upset that there may not be baseball this season. Now, granted, we are still at a point where there could be an abbreviated spring training and an abbreviated season, and we're not at that point where it's been canceled. But I don't see anybody really crying and upset about it, Joey.
No, I don't either. And that leads to the larger question, and can point out the problems the game has is certainly if you do anything to mess with the NFL, people are going to notice. If you do anything to mess with college football, people are going to notice. Baseball, not so much. I think people are just passively following it from afar. They're not really affected by it. I think in some Florida communities, people that make part of their livelihood from spring training games are starting to get a little upset and nervous about the whole thing. But otherwise, there is no furor in the sports landscape over the potential lack of baseball. Now, they have set a line in the sand February 28th, I believe, where if they go past that, they don't believe they can get the season started on time, the regular season, that is. So we'll see if there's any progress being made. But I don't think anybody even cares to a large degree at this
Why
point
is that?
in America.
What happened?
Well,
What was the linchpin that finally broke the back here?
I mean, part of it is the dominance of football. I think football is just so overwhelming, and now we're going to have other iterations of football in the spring that are going to be television sports and people are going to watch. Of course, even though it's not the NFL, they'll still watch. Football's become a 24/7, 365-day industry where even beyond the games, the draft and the combine and all the off-season activities almost are as command as much attention as the games themselves. College football and recruiting is a cottage industry. So football beyond the games has just a number of things that command people's attention.
Well,
Baseball still has its place, but certainly less of a place than it once has. And if it goes away and people don't care, then I think that makes a huge commentary on where the baseball stands in the country.
but there's got to be something else, guys. I mean, I grant you, Joey, you're correct. The National Football League, the marketing, the way they've handled it, they are a 365-day-a-year event with all the different things that go on. Baseball goes into a slumber mode every year, right after the World Series, and shows up sleepily in February. And yeah, there's an occasional player here and there, some news that happens. But they've tinkered with the rules. They've gone back and forth on now the designated hitter is it, which frankly I'm a fan of. Just put the DH in there and get rid of the pitchers. I don't care. But the tinkering goes on and on here. Does baseball need to sit back and say, look, we're going to make our money, but we're never going to catch football. We're second, and as a matter of fact, somebody else may grab us too. I mean, we've screwed up so badly that we can't grab the fan back. I mean, is that what they just have to realize?
I really believe that. Go ahead, George.
No, I think there's a couple of factors involved. I mean, with the different work stoppages and strikes, they've got some self-imposed scars to deal with. But I also think from a cultural standpoint, we're looking at baseball being the national pastime for so many decades. And it was we've gone with different, it's a different era and a different time.
Is it fair to say that's gone? First of all, that's gone. Baseball is no longer the national pastime.
Right. So what's the attention span of millennials or kids? They're on the cell. Yes. And what do you need to really embrace the nuances of a baseball game? You need patience. You need to get into the sport. You need to be okay with somebody fouling off a pitch 10 times in a row before you have a decisive conclusion to that at bat. And frankly, it's the nature of the game. And like you said, they've tinkered with it. They've tried to speed things up so the guy's not on the mound scratching himself. The guy's not there getting out of the batter's box, taking forever. But you can only do so much, Ed. And I think that's a big part of it. It's just baseball has kind of outlived its purpose and its interest into 2022.
Wow. Think of what you just said here. Baseball has outlived its purpose. We've reached the point, Sam, where in many instances, yeah, maybe it has. It's a great high school sport. It's a great kids sport. It's a great college sport. I love college baseball. And it's a great international sport where there's people who are now playing more baseball in different corners of the world than ever before and are using it as a social mesh to bring things together. But as Major League Baseball, they lost their shot, and maybe they'll never get it back.
Well, I think, and I used to not agree with this, but I really have come to the thinking that baseball has become more of a regional sport. I mean, if you live in Tampa, you're going to be a Rays fan. You're not going to pay that much attention to what the Red Sox are doing or what the Kansas City Royals are up to until the postseason, when teams get into the postseason.
Well, but what about, hang on, let me stop you there. What about, I'll keep Tampa, for instance. There's a huge Red Sox contingent there and a huge Yankees contingent there because of the Yankees spring training there.
Sure.
I mean, isn't it fair to say you still go to a lot of these places like Tampa? In many cases, the visiting team will outweigh and outnumber the home team.
Yeah, maybe that was a bad example because both Boston and New York have, tremendous Yankee
I get your point,
and
though.
Red Sox fan bases. But, I mean, fans of the Kansas City Royals don't care what the California Angels are doing
That's true.
until the postseason. So I think it's become much more regionalized. The baseball attendance is just fine, at least in the cities where teams are competitive. I mean, I grew up as an Oriole fan, and ever since Peter Angelos has bought the team, it's been very difficult to be a fan of that team because the television money, the sponsorship money is plenty enough for him, and attendance is down there at Camden Yards because the team just hasn't been competitive, plain and simple. So I do think it's become somewhat regionalized until the playoffs. But in terms of a work stoppage, you know what fans are thinking? It's one group of rich guys yelling at another group of rich guys. It's the billionaires yelling at the millionaires and vice versa. And fans don't care. I mean, the amount of money that they talk about, just it becomes something that fans, it just goes right over their head. When you're talking about paying a backup second baseman $1.6 million a year to play in 28 games, I mean, that's that just is a concept that fans can't really
Yeah, but
grab
haven't we
onto.
been saying that now for 20, 30 years? I mean, you're right. But
Which
as
is
far as
why
I
I
can
think the
remember,
sport
every
has
time there's
become
been a job
regionalized.
stoppage in baseball, one of the first things out of our mouths is fans don't care about the money. We're still here. It's the same thing.
Because it's become regionalized. I used to think that Oriole fans cared what Reggie Jackson was making because it may impact them. Now there's so much money in the game. I think that the Oriole fans are interested in the Orioles and what's happened in the American League East, and that's about it until the postseason. And then of course, as Oriole fans, we go to sleep and try to wake up on March 1st.
Marlins fans as well. So does anybody here have an idea? Look, I have no idea. How do you solve this then? I mean, I think Sam's right because let's take certain markets. He's right about Kansas City. People in Boston, well, they care about what the Yankees are doing, but you won't see the fans there screaming with Yankee fans. The people in Chicago care about the Cubs. The people in Miami don't care about anything that doesn't include that doesn't have Marlins on it because they're all fans of another sport somewhere. I'll get hammered for that, and I don't care. But what's the key then to make baseball relevant to where people care about the sport?
The players
I
and
had
the
an
owners
answer for
themselves have to care about the sport.
Yeah.
Players and the owners have to care.
Yeah.
But do they?
I will say, I don't think there's a lot of kids playing the sport, stick and ball sports, baseball and softball. I was a baseball dad. That's a way of life, and not only high school teams, but these AAU teams and these travel teams. They are hugely popular and hugely populated with kids playing the sport. I think they all have some aspirations of playing at a higher level, but I think there are more people playing it than ever before, but I don't think there are as many people caring about the sport as there once was, if that makes any sense. I go back to 1981 when we had a work stoppage, a strike in baseball, and knocked out pretty much the sport over the entire summer. That seemed catastrophic to me at the time because there was nothing else to fill the sports entertainment appetite. I think if you go to a time like now, there's so much going on that people can entertain themselves with, and you can stream television shows, you can get things on demand, these things that didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago, that something like baseball can disappear and be unnoticed by most of the population, which,
Wait a minute.
30, 40 years, yeah, 30, 40 years ago, that would never have happened. So I think baseball has to be really careful about its place in society, its place in the entertainment marketplace, and not take anything for granted because maybe they're not as popular as they think they are. And if they don't exist, they might be surprised at how people move on without them.
Well, then maybe it's not a bad idea to put a runner at second base in extra innings. Maybe it's not a bad idea to have the DH in both leagues. Maybe it's not a bad idea to have the shift available. Maybe it's not a bad idea to where the pitchers are forced to throw nothing but fastballs these days, and the hitters actually have a huge advantage over the hitters because nobody gives a shit if they're going to turn a 6-4-3 double play anymore or have a great triple play. Give me home runs. I mean,
Now,
maybe that's
you
it.
don't change the game. You don't change the game. You don't change the competition. You don't mess with the rules. What you do is you make the participants more inviting as individuals, and that's exactly what F1 has done. I don't know if any of you have watched this Drive to Survive, the documentary on F1, and it has absolutely exploded the sport. Certainly in North America, but around the world, the numbers of people now watching and are interested and know something about F1 simply because they open their doors, and I mean, warts and all, you see all of it. And so I know names of F1 drivers now who are 10th in the standings that I would have no idea before. But I find these guys and their teams and how they operate kind of an interesting story, almost a soap opera playing out in real time. And if baseball wants to save themselves, and I know Roger Goodell is trying to figure out how to do that in football. It's why they had Hard Knocks during the season this year with the Indianapolis Colts. It's the first time they've ever done that. If baseball wants to save themselves, they have to make the participants much more inviting personalities, and that's going to take a collaborative thing between the Players Association and the ownership.
Go ahead, George.
No, I was going to say that we all know this. Every sport is driven by stars, and baseball has its stars, but it's certainly the marketing aspect of it. They're not out there on everybody can't name you the top 10 baseball players, that they like. And one thing, let's compare it to NASCAR, right? NASCAR had all these iconic drivers, and obviously it went down. Interestingly enough, the death of Earnhardt, the icon, helped spur the sport to better things.
Because it opened more doors for more people to get involved and more names to get involved. And there was a hole that needed to be filled.
Their britches, and they started to go, hey, let's shut down these smaller tracks and let's go. But anyway, so the trajectory was such, they had a good run. What happened is the Jimmy Johnsons, the Tony Stewarts of the world, they ended up, retiring. And now, where is NASCAR? They've got yet another new car out there that they're trying to promote. But there's not enough stars out there. There's not, you got Kyle Larson, you got Kevin Harvick. You just got not enough guys, I think, with enough pizzazz to carry over beyond, like what Sam is saying, that regional, insular aspect. And so that is part of the problem with baseball. They've got to be able to connect with a larger audience.
We don't know who the players are, and let's be honest, a lot of the players in baseball don't want to get involved in this. They don't want you. They'll go out on Twitter, but they don't want you involved in my life. There's a couple of things here, guys, very briefly. You've got players who don't want to get involved, teams that don't ask the players or force the players to get involved. You have a language barrier where either players only speak Japanese, Korean, Spanish, or English so that they can't cross over into all of these various areas, and that creates a problem. And then you also have the social mores where people don't like certain things about certain players and don't like the fact that they played here and don't like this. There's no push for baseball to make their players human anymore. The only time we seem to hear about players is when they drop a steroid or when they break a rule or when they take a bat to somebody's head or when something happens on the field. There's no... I want to say warm and fuzzy, but that I don't want to get there. But at least I don't see anybody caring about players, and I don't see the players in baseball caring about the game.
The one thing I remember about last season that got the biggest reaction from people I know that love baseball was that Field of Dreams game that they put on, which seemed to, maybe a little hokey at times, but with the Yankees and the White Sox coming out from the cornfield. But man, the way that was put on and presented on television,
it was
people
theater.
loved that. They loved it. Yeah, it was a great story. And obviously, the way the game played out, ironically, just, they couldn't script that, but it was a fantastic ending to the game. But it was like watching a movie. It was entertainment. And
there you go.
People who didn't even like baseball watched that and thought it was great. So
look at what the National Hockey League did when they created the outdoor series. Brilliant, except for the fact sometimes you got to make the ice. But it was brilliant. And the fact that they play in other places. The NHL did it right and all that. But where does baseball go? You've got one Field of Dreams. Where else are you going to play? College stadiums? I mean, you can't rebuild Ebbets Field.
You've got to be able to have the players identified as people. The NFL, and Ed mentioned it earlier, has mythologized their players. When I was at the NFL Honors Show last Thursday, you see, I mean, every big star was there. They're all there, right? And the mythological idea of who these guys are has been created by the PR machine of the media and the NFL and the Players Association and the agents themselves. When you see these guys interact with each other, you realize, and we all know this because we've been hanging around them forever, they're just guys. You see them interact with each other. But I mean, if Mike Trout walked into the room, most people wouldn't know who he was because baseball hasn't done a good job with that. He might be the best baseball player of the last 50 years. And baseball has not done a very good job in promoting who that is, different kinds of players. I just think that there's a disconnect between some of these sports and what football has done. Of course, football I do think has an advantage because there's a sporadic nature to the actual competition being played.
Right. You have
Baseball
time
has a
between
rhythm.
games to do these sort of things.
But I do think that the other sports, I mean, look at the NBA. The NBA had a mythological players. They just made a movie about Showtime. Both Bird and Magic kind of recreated the NBA, and then Michael came along, and it became personality driven, as well as those guys could really play, obviously. But baseball, hockey, so many other sports have yet to figure out that you've got to have identifiable stars, as George said, and you've got to create them as larger than life figures. Maybe part of the problem is that in baseball, if you fail 70% of the time, they put you in the Hall of Fame.
Well, isn't it, from what you've said, isn't it fair to say that at this point, this baseball season could be a complete wash and fans don't care about it? This is the spot. Major League Baseball, and Sam, your point about Kansas City and others, this is the time when let me stop. Because of the lockout, the players are not under contract technically, and the teams can't tell them what to do at this point. They can't get them involved. But this would be a perfect point for the agents, the players, the representative, the sponsors to get involved and say, Joe Jones of the Marlins or whatever from the Angels, we're going to get you out there. We're going to create a marketing campaign. We're going to put you on the radio. We're going to get you onto the shows like this. I mean, it's a massive opportunity that they're missing. And I'll go back again to that sleepy nature of baseball. When the World Series is over, let's wait for the winter meetings. Oh, the winter meetings, 3 days. What's next? Oh, spring training. It's the same thing. They go to sleep when baseball has failed, correct me if I'm wrong, to really take advantage of those holes in the schedule, and that's why people don't care.
Well, they failed to take advantage of a lot of things. As we were talking, it got me thinking about, again, the next generation. What video games do we all talk about? Madden, right? We talk about Madden, we talk about NBA 2K, whatever.
Minecraft.
Yeah. And do we talk about whatever version baseball's got out there? No. Another marketing fail. And again, I do think it's not so much, it might be some marketing involved, but I think a lot of it is a generational thing. Baseball's not sexy enough for the younger generation at this point.
Wow.
Yeah, but if I'm an agent of one of these big star players, I'd say, listen, for the next 3 months, I'm having 2 cameras follow you around everywhere. And we're going to create a reality show or a series or some sort of documentary about who you are, because there's enough outlets out there that where people can see this, enough platforms.
Think about it. Even if you use this kind of a technology,
if baseball's not going to do it, somebody's got to do it.
Even if you use the kind of technology that we use here in doing this show, if a star player sat in front of his camera for 10 minutes a day and just told stories, here's my family, here's my dog, here's what I'm doing, here's this, just told stories, the fans would attract to that. And after a while, it would be kind of like, fireplace time with the ball player. And I think you're right, Sam. I mean, it doesn't cost much. It doesn't cost much at all. Maybe nothing. Yeah. But they don't do it. Baseball players have to care about the game. And I don't think they care. I really don't. I think there's a lot of social dysfunction that goes on there, which we'll deal with another time. We were out of time this time. God, we got to do this. We got to find somebody to give us $1 jillion so we can do this every day.
Sneeze. What can I say?
George just sneezed at the point of $1 jillion.
For $1 jillion, I would do it every day.
Yeah.
Every damn day. I don't care.
That might be my number, actually.
And don't worry, if we get that, maybe what I'll do is I'll go see if I can get Guitar Center to sponsor the show so that Sam can then go back off his wall, pick up his guitar, and play for us one day. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, Sam, you're off the hook. ASCAP BMI would hit us with $1 million in fines.
I'd play less than 15 seconds of every song.
Well, yeah. Or you play something
legal.
original, we're okay. You know, we're fine there. Remind
I
everybody.
would like us to promote Sam's musical ability, have him do it, and then see what the viewership is. I think we might be on to something
I think
here.
so.
I like that. That. Okay. Well, but see, wait a minute. See, this is not fair. This is not fair. If Sam is going to come up and we're going to ask Sam to play original music and to show us his musical talent, Joey and George, I think you guys then have to show us an original talent from your side then that has to. So
I took some guitar lessons, so if I kind of got back into it, I might be able to do a little backup Sam a little bit, and hopefully he can play that signature song of his, "Ode to Urban Meyer," because I think that has a lot of potential to go.
By the way, that's a very short song. Okay, it only had like 11 seconds.
The world's first 10-second hit. Joey,
Hello, goodbye.
Joey, is there anything musical?
Passable piano skills. I could perhaps play the piano a little bit.
There you go.
I at one time was pursuing that and then drifted away, but I always wanted to be the guy who could walk into a room with a piano and play it. And for a while I could do it slightly, and I would like to get back to that at some point. So maybe this is a motivation to get going.
And I sing. I've been on stage before. I've done plays. I've done theater and singing before. And I play a mean harmonica.
Yeah, I smell a Super Bowl halftime show next year.
Look at this. We went the whole show. I'm going to congratulate all of us. We went the whole show and didn't bitch once about the Super Bowl halftime show. That's which as I said to people, if you like it, listen to it. If you don't like it, don't listen to it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really all it takes for me. We'll do that another day. Reminder, if you want to get a hold of everybody here, and please do. For George Diaz, Facebook and Instagram at George Diaz 758. Twitter is at George Diaz, and he will answer you back. And ask him about going to Disney World, and he'll be able to tell you all those wonderful stories there while we're paying $300 for an individual ticket these days. For Joey Johnston, Facebook is at Joey Johnston 372. Twitter and Instagram at Joey Johnston 813. Remember, Tom Brady is not coming back. Keep saying that over and over again. Imagine what happens if he does. And for Sam Kouvaris, by the way, just before we do that, over your left shoulder, there's a guitar there that has a very interesting face plate there, and the way is that anything special? Was that?
Which one?
Oh yeah, yeah, that one right there. It's a good-looking guitar.
Thank you. I actually picked that up a couple weeks ago. That's a Yamaha Trans Acoustic. It's actually got the speaker in the box. This one though is signed by Chris Stapleton, so that's pretty good.
Oh,
I got one hanging over here, signed by Sister Hazel, and the two I play are actually in front of me. My wife was nice enough to buy me a beautiful Gibson Hummingbird a couple years ago for Christmas.
I hate you right now because Chris Stapleton is the one guy that I do want to see in concert really bad. And Sam will get us tickets. Facebook and Twitter at Sam Kouvaris, Instagram at Sam Kouvaris Jr., and the website is samsportsline.com. Gentlemen, always a pleasure again. Let's do this again hopefully next week. We'll get everybody together, and we still won't talk about the Super Bowl halftime show. I'll be very happy. Trust me on that. Guys, thanks so much. Take care. That is the free-for-all. Reminder again that you can get us by going to TalkSportsNetwork.com. You can get a hold of me at Berliner Speaks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all of our episodes are now going to be on download. Go to iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Search out my name or search out The Man in the Arena. series. And you can listen and download all of these conversations here as well. For Sam, for George, for Joey, and everybody else, I'm Ed Berliner. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Rock on, true believers. Until next time, see ya!